Now I'd like to welcome to the stage, firstly, you've seen his speaker already, Brett Solomon. Of course, is a former executive director of GetUp, but is now started this organisation, accessnow.org, which is an amazing organisation. Please welcome Brett. And also Andy Kuper. Andy will be speaking to you later, and Andy runs a thing called Leapfrog Investments, which is an investment fund where he run on a commercial basis, where people actually put their money into this fund and then give insurance to people in the third world to insure things like their crops or to give life insurance. So two people, I think, who are touching on important issues in the third world and in developing nations, but in very different ways. So let's have a chat. Let's start with Brett. Brett, look, this Access Now is an amazing idea to try and give kind of technological help to people in obviously third world or developing nations or places where you don't have such freedom. Now, I'm interested, are you going to be, do you need people on the ground in these countries, or is this all done through technology? Can you kind of, from an office in New York, can you help these people without actually having anyone on the ground? Is that how it works?
So, I guess there's many different ways to do it. The thing is that there isn't really in existence, like if you think about, I was talking about cyber warfare before, but you think about, say, in traditional war, there's always, civil society has played a role, so in terms of like alerting people to the fact that there's a conflict, or even all the way to providing humanitarian relief. The thing about digital relief is that you can actually provide it without being there. But the thing is that you need, and one of the lessons that we've learned is that this is actually about trust. We were talking about trust in the last presentation. This is actually about circles of trust. So when you're providing digital relief to people, it means that you have to get past the point where they might think that your digital relief might actually be putting them in peril. So yes, you need people from outside, but you also need people on the inside who trust you to open up their...
So for instance, people in Iran who are going to trust you, you don't want them thinking this is possibly the government trying to, say, use this technology or use this mechanism, but it's actually them just trying to get their passwords or something like that. So so you're trying to build, as well as build the technology, you're trying to build networks on the ground to actually make sure people understand that Access Now is something they can trust.
So that's true, and I think one of the other things to note here is that like many people don't understand, particularly human rights activists, human rights defenders, that the consequences of actually operating online. I think people think that, our experience is that people don't necessarily gauge the dangers. We leave digital droppings everywhere we go. And this is a really vital point, because the whole human rights sector, in a sense, and the democracy advocates around the world are operating largely in ignorance. And the risks that's posed to them by their operations online are very, very significant. And that's why I started with that first point about the password being the key. If you think about like a drop of dye, like it goes through a network very, very quickly. So you can actually see you can see everyone. So this question about security is top of the pops.
Now, you've also been quite vocal in your opposition of the government's current idea of having firewalls and the kind of Conroy restrictions on the internet. Now, it's interesting because I know that's caused a bit of controversy in a sense. Your point, I think, to a point, is that if a government like Australia puts in place the infrastructure to prevent freedom on the internet, then in the end, another government like Iran will use that infrastructure against it. But do you think that argument therefore says that on the internet we should have no restrictions whatsoever?
The amazing thing about the internet is that it is such an open, multipolar space. And to try and restrict it in a way that, with this example, won't actually work, to me, it just seems inane. I do think that there needs to be policing, and I do think that there needs to be, assessment and an auditing of what's going on. But on the other hand, to actually strangle the internet, to take away its incredible promise, because we're focusing on a very, very, very small problem, in this case, child pornography. It's evil, it's wicked, but should we all suffer as a result of that when the system in place that they're proposing is actually
See, I think the thing that's useful for your argument at the moment is that the government system doesn't work. Yeah. But hypothetically, if the government was able to come up with a system that did work, if you know, Conroy and Rudd could say, we've got this system to prevent child pornography coming through, would you still argue against it on the basis
Absolutely, because the reason why, I mean, there's many reasons. The one is that there are alternatives, so why put something like this in place that has unintended consequences? The other is potentially unintended consequences. The other thing is that we don't know what's going to happen in 20 years. Like, what happens when that infrastructure is in place? And we've seen already, the government has changed its ideas 3 times on this internet filter. And so who knows what's going to happen in 2 years, in 5 years, in 10 years. Once you have that infrastructure in place, the biggest problem is mission creep. So I think we should undoubtedly be against it and put the alternatives in place, like policing, parenting and education, as I said.
You're not suggesting that power could go to Kevin Rudd's head, are you, Brett? That would never happen. It's a very calm man. Cara, have we got some questions from the floor?
There's a lot of questions for Brett. A lot of people lining up for questions for Brett. Firstly, Simon.
Hi, Brett. The company I work for has an office up in Bangkok, and on Thursday we got word that the government was shutting the internet down up there. I'm just wondering, is Access now, looking at what's going on up there, what type of stuff's happening?
So one of the reasons why we launched this organisation, and in fact it's myself and 3 others, 2 Iranians and a young Vietnamese woman, the co-founders of the organisation. One of the reasons is because this issue is a rash. Like, this issue around online censorship and monitoring is being replicated all over the world. I don't know if people saw, but in Pakistan yesterday, they announced that they were going to be censoring YouTube. Now, there are about a dozen, what we call the dirty dozen, 12 countries that are the most egregious offenders. But in fact, 30% of the world lives behind the firewall. And so the problem is there, the problem is growing. The issue is, from our perspective, and if anybody out there wants to support us, they're welcome to, because there is such a huge amount of demand, but only a very small sector that's actually responding to this to ensure that the internet can be prized open in moments of crisis.
All right, we'll come back to some more questions for Brett in a bit, but I want to talk to Andy quickly, because in a sense, Andy's doing something which is, it's quite different. Andy has an organisation which is a very commercial organisation, but which has a very real effect in the third world, a micro-insurance in the third world. And I know that Andy has some arguments you might find slightly controversial, and that is about how charity isn't solving these problems. So I'd like to speak to Andy here about, if you could kind of talk to us about why you're, by working with private equity firms and by raising money this way, you think you're going to have a better effect in the third world than, for instance, people giving to charity.
Well, that's right. When we take the issue of poverty very seriously, we realize that there are 4 billion poor people out there. So if you think about reaching those people, let's look at, for instance, the Gates Foundation. It has $40 billion. Well, that sounds like a lot of money, and everybody's hoping the Gates Foundation will change everything. But of course, for 4 billion people, that's $10 a piece. Even if you could get them all that money tomorrow, at no corruption, no friction, no transaction costs, that's $10 a person. If you say poverty wages are $2 a day, that money would last them 5 days. So if you think charity is very important, don't get me wrong, but if you think it's going to put an end to or make a massive dent on poverty, it's la-la land. So how do we reach those people? Well, there's another pool, which is the capital markets. Every day on the capital markets, $3 or $4 trillion changes hands. And so what my team and I have looked at is how to open those gates of the capital market, so that that capital flows through to those poor people and helps them to get out of poverty. So what we did was we created a fund, a for-profit fund. And that fund has taken capital from the likes of JP Morgan. And what that fund does is it invests in businesses serving the poor. And we invest in those businesses and we grow those businesses very substantially, so that you can reach millions and millions and millions of people on a sustainable basis.
So yeah, so you're in a sense putting in place a commercial infrastructure which allows people in the third world to actually access money that they would never be able to get a handle on otherwise. And I know this is, a lot of people will know about Grameen Bank, which of course led to giving microloans to people. But similarly, Leapfrog gives micro-insurance, so it gives small amounts of money. And how important is that to the third world? I mean, I think we all take insurance for granted, or kind of find it an annoyance here. How important is microinsurance for people in the third world?
Well, simply put, the experience of being poor is about being close to destitution, being close to poverty or total lack of capital. And what that means is you lie awake at night worrying you're going to lose everything. So why is insurance important? Well, it puts that floor under your potential loss. So you have a safety net. All of us take that for granted. We're able to access capital through our friends or through our family, or we have an insurance policy, or we have savings. If you're poor, you may have none of that. So insurance doesn't sound like it's sexy, but it's absolutely critical as the financial service, along with savings, that are going to help people to end that cycle of poverty. Now, the really exciting thing is, as with insurance provided here in Australia and in the US and all over the world, it can be provided profitably. And what that means is you can get really significant capital, because each of those policies requires that some company be there setting up the infrastructure, training the sales force, developing the product, and making sure that when people need a payout, they get that payout. So it's a tremendously exciting thing that you can access the capital to make it happen. And remember, you're not giving people insurance. You're bringing them a product that is quality and relevant and affordable that they then want to buy. So it's providing value to them. It's something that's real for them. It's not you rushing in and saying, oh, you're a charity ward, let me show how magnanimous I am. It's saying, I have to supply you, the customer, with something you really need that is going to transform your life and help you escape poverty.
Two very different ways to deal with some problems in the developing world. And if you're skeptical still, watch Andy's speeches coming up, and I'm sure you'll be convinced. Cara, we've got some more questions over there.
We've got a few more questions of Brett. I don't know how many we'll get in. This is from Rosamond.
Hello, my question is for Brett. Brett, I'm a great admirer and a great follower. I follow all your calls for petitions, etc. My question for you is, how do you select which of the crushing problems and issues, and the one I'm involved with is the takeover of the national parks for commercialisation and development, how do you choose which ones you will make the petition for and get that huge groundswell, because it is so effective? I have great admiration for what you're doing.
I mean, the answer to that question actually is that in this model, in the GetUp model or the Avaz model, you choose. Because as a member, you may or may not have received a continual barrage of questions about what you think. And so there are questions that are being asked of the community, of the GetUp community, like where does the commercialisation of national parks sit? Where does issues around climate change sit, or asylum seekers and refugees? And based on that, that is the starting point. And that's why the GetUp community continues to grow, because you actually, as an organisation, we are just feeding the community back what it's asking for.
Another question, Cara.
Joan just wants to make a quick statement.
My name's Joan Kroll. I talk all the time and I'm very bossy. And I just want to make a statement to everybody. Why do we allow millions to be born to die in the world when basic birth control can be taught and practiced by everybody?
Thank you, Joan. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much. So thank you to Andy and Brett for coming up here. It's been a very interesting questions, and I think there's a lot of people who will be watching with interest as Andy takes the stage very soon in the main hall.